Thanks for looking.
No worries. No, thank you.
I looked back.
Right. Nope, I think I'll be fine without it. Thank you.
Need a definition.
We needed that.
I thought you were retired. I've been seeing you driving around.
And where to put it.
It's really a tough transition.
Call to meeting the Planning and Zoning Commission for Monday, May 13th, 2019. Roll call, please.
Tony Gokenbach,
Here?
Mark Hydrich.
Here.
Mark Kleesner,
Here?
Mark Piontek, Tom Holmeyer,
Here.
Andy Lucy,
Here.
John Borgman,
Here.
Chuck Watson,
Here.
Samantha Wacker. Here. Carolyn Witt, Sal Maniaci.
Here.
Please rise for a pledge of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the April 8th, 2019 meeting. If you've had a chance to review those.
Motion to approve.
Second.
First and a second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. Item number 3, file number 190501. Applicant is requesting a special use permit for 1807 East Fifth Street. Sal?
Yes, so the applicant is requesting a special use permit at 1807 East Fifth Street for an indoor gun range. So if you remember, just about 2 months ago, we did amend the zoning code to add that definition. We did not have an indoor gun range in our code previously, so we added it as a special use permit requirement in commercial and industrial properties. So the applicant has, and we kind of knew that was coming down the pipeline, that's why we did that process. So the applicant has now come back forward and turned in their application. As you can see here, the property is zone C2 general commercial. It has general commercial on each side of it, and it actually does have some commercial property wrapped around the rear where the actual addition will be. So the rear of the addition where the indoor gun range will be actually will back up to commercial property rather than residential. And then there is light industrial right across Fifth Street as well. So it is in a mixed commercial residential area, but a little bit higher intensity commercial on this end of Fifth Street. Rather than general retail, is a little bit higher intensity uses with some auto shops, some outdoor storage, that sort of thing. So the use itself we feel is appropriate for the area. It's all going to be done indoors. They'll have to make sure they meet all the building code requirements, the fire code. They did submit a site plan showing the proposed addition, a 60 by 60 addition. This dotted line, they did a boundary adjustment at council to move this property line over 20 feet so they could fit the building and have an appropriate 10-foot setback here. You can see the addition, and it does line up with the portion that's already commercial behind it. So staff sees no issue. We are recommending approval. They will have to go through general site plan to get their building permit. However, it does not appear they're going to be removing any parking. They're going to be building on the grassed area, and so they should have plenty of parking on site, but they will have to show the amount of spaces based on square footage during site plan. So if you have any questions of me, I'd be happy to answer.
Any questions by board?
Yeah, Sal, this is something fairly new for Washington.
It is, yeah. We didn't have the definition prior, and we actually prohibited discharging a firearm in the city limits unless you're on 3 acres, which was something we did when annexing larger pieces if someone wanted to hunt, but the way it was worded didn't allow it indoors either, and so we cleaned that up just to add the use as another definition. It's not something we wanted to completely disallow. We just wanted to make sure it had the correct regulations.
Okay, well, that's good. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments by board? Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak on this? Okay, if not, I'll entertain a motion.
I will say, just quickly, the gentleman proposing this expansion is a client of mine with whom I do business. I will be recusing myself because I'm not sure at what point, but I will say that everything looks in line, and this will actually enhance safety measures and training inside the city limits of Washington for its uses.
No other comments, discussion, I'll entertain a motion.
Well, I'll make a motion that we approve.
Second.
First and second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. I should have announced earlier that item number 5, the file number 190503, applicant is requesting to vacate East Rose Lane, is not going to be on the agenda. It's been withdrawn. And item number 7, file number 190401, applicant is requesting to rezone number 4 and number 10 Franklin Avenue from C1 Limited Commercial District to C2 General. That has also been withdrawn. Moving on, item number 4, file number 190502, applicant is requesting preliminary plat approval. Sal, this looks like a cleanup situation?
Yeah, this is a very simple preliminary plat. So this lot is located on High Street, just north of Highway 100 and the Westplex Shopping Center here. Right now, currently, there is, you can see where this basin is, there's a culvert down there. The City of Washington already has an easement for that stormwater retention basin, and we maintain it. We've had, since it's been constructed, that was the deal that was agreed to. The applicant is just wishing to subdivide it and create a different lot to get it off their tax roll, and then they will transfer the ownership of that over to the city. So it won't just be an easement for us, it would be a property that we will take over. It won't change anything for us. We already were taking over maintenance, zoned residentially, but there's no plans for this lot. They were just trying to break it up into 2 pieces. So you can see here, the half acre to the north fits perfectly over what the original easement was. So we can still get in there and do our maintenance needed, and have the land we need. And then here's the lot 1A of the remainder lot that the applicant will hold on to. So pretty straightforward. We are recommending approval. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Questions from board? Anyone in the audience that would like to speak on this, please feel free. If not, any further discussion? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. Moving on to item number 6, zoning code amendment. Sal?
All right, so this is something that staff recommended to place on the agenda. As a lot of you are aware, the past few months there's been discussions of placing a temporary emergency shelter or homeless shelter in the city of Washington. We were talking to the individuals about what regulations the city had on how that could be placed zoning-wise, and talking to our city attorney and going through our zoning code, we realized we didn't have a definition in our code that described what that use was. The only thing we had closest to it was a hotel/motel, something that has transient guest, overnight guest. The original assumption was, well, this could just be considered a motel that is free. That's essentially what it was. And all hotels, motels, or operations that have transient overnight guests are permitted in C2 and C3, so our general commercial and downtown commercial properties, without any special use permit, without any public hearing. And so that was what we told the interested parties. That was what the code they had to go to, hence the file that was withdrawn that would have been after this. However, when it was discussed with city staff, we realized that that wasn't the best definition to put it into. It didn't really fit into a hotel motel. And so doing a little homework, our city code, our zoning code, all of our uses are derived from what's called the North American Industry Classification System. It's called the NAICS code. And that is a code that businesses all over North America use to classify what type of business there is. It actually gives them a numbered code that they can use to make sure they are they're classified as a certain type of use. And so what we did is we looked up, we found that NAICS code online, and our code, when we approved it in 2017, revamped it in 2017, it actually does call out that NAICS qualification numbers and says if the definition is not listed here, you can find it in the NAICS code. So we pulled it up and found this definition here for temporary shelters, and it's defined as establishments primarily engaged in providing one short-term emergency shelter for victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, or child abuse, and or temporary residential shelter for homeless individuals or families, runaway youth, and patients and families caught in medical crisis. These establishments may operate in their own shelters or may subsidize housing using existing homes, apartments, hotels, or motels. So the first thing we wanted to do was we need to make sure this has an actual definition that matches the NAICS code that we derive from on everything else, not try to fit it into something that it's really not. And so that is the definition we're going with. We did not write that. We did take that directly from that North American standard. And then the second question was, well, now that we have a definition for it, where are these going to be permitted and how are they going to be reviewed? And we thought it was something that is this intensive and can have interested parties from all the surrounding, not just the surrounding properties, but in the neighborhood at large, the community at large. We thought it definitely needed to be a special use permit because every property is different. Everything needs to be reviewed by case basis. Just similar to how we had with that shooting range that we approved in C2. A special use permit is permitted in is a permit that is a use that's permitted in certain district with additional conditions. So planning and zoning and city council can approve a special use on a property with extra conditions. And so that was the route we wanted to go. And then our recommendation is to permit them with a special use in our M1 and M2 zone districts, which is light industrial and heavy industrial. So that's the code amendment you have in front of you tonight as recommended by staff. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer. So,
Questions by board members?
Yes. Oh, go ahead, sir.
No, you go ahead, John.
What is the basis for coming up with the M1 and M2 as opposed to C? commercial?
well, the discussion was that it is an intensive use that could benefit from being separated from higher traffic, higher pedestrian activities.
What would be the downside of having this as potentially a C4, where neighbors could still get a lot of input as a
Well-
special use within C4?
So we don't have C4 anymore. It's,
Okay,
yeah,
well,
planned commercial, but a planned commercial has a minimum lot size of 5 acres. And so that would be, that could be difficult.
Okay.
Because planned commercial is really meant for like a larger development. Our planned districts are.
I guess my only concern is if we would go into the M1 or M2, your properties lots are a lot larger, and you have a lot less neighboring properties usually. So therefore, the requirement of, 180 feet that property owners get notified about would be a lot less than if it was in a more commercial area. You would have more public notification of something going on.
Yeah, we measure
Makes
from,
sense.
yeah, we measure from property boundary. So if the lots right next door are larger than 180 feet in depth, you're right, just the adjoining properties would be notified and would qualify, well, never mind, special use permits do not qualify for protest petitions, so only rezonings. But they're right, only those would be qualified, notified, and it is your prerogative, this group's prerogative, if they would like to amend that to add C1, C2. That was just our first recommendation.
Any other questions, discussion by board members?
So, do we have a map or anything that shows where
Yeah, I can pull up our zoning.
property is located that's already zoned industrial?
All right, so the color is not going to be greatest on the screen with the sunlight, but anything, that's blue, anything light gray or dark gray is industrial. So let me zoom out a little bit further.
Let it populate.
If I can get this to load.
So we're looking for light gray.
Yeah, so you have this area off of A Street here. So this is A Street right here. This is Jefferson. And so everything off 10th and Stafford, like the old Hazel plant was, that's all industrial. That's actually M2. It's a heavier industrial. You have light industrial up and down Jefferson and Market here for the trailer park here is light industrial. Yeah, A Street, Jefferson and Market. Yeah, the lumberyard. Actually, Mercy South is still zoned industrial from when it used to be the Zero plant, because that hospital use was permitted there, so they did not have to rezone. You have where the old bowling alley was, off of International Avenue. Here, this is all light industrial, then you do have some heavy industrial in this area. And then I don't think we have anything really further east, but obviously,
And C2 is red, right?
yeah, C2 is red. Everything in Chamber Drive here, so this is Highway A. This is Chamber Drive, that's our first industrial park, and then obviously when you go out west, this is all,
Okay. So Sal, the ones that were previously C4, what are they called? I mean, I see in our code now we've got PDC, but the lots that were smaller that we did previously, are they called something different now?
no, so they remained C4 because they had an ordinance
Okay. And-
for that special use,
Yeah,
or
the
special
reason I'm
plan.
asking, I mean, as I'm reading the code, it says the minimum lot size can be waived. So that's why I'm just wondering if this type of use might not be appropriate for, something that was planned that would give a little bit more input to anybody that's around it.
Right. Yeah, there is a way, it's just like a variance for anything else. It doesn't have to go to the Board of Adjustment. It has to go through this board and council to be
Yes.
waived. That is correct. And that's definitely an option, but I mean, I would also say that it's special use does something, unless Mark can correct me, but you can add similar conditions to a special use ordinance or a planned district ordinance, if I'm not mistaken. Or is there a benefit over making someone go PDC over special use?
Not that I can tell.
The-
Yeah.
Would you introduce yourself?
We know who you are.
Fast, I got up as soon as I said. No, I was just asking if it's a planned commercial district, I don't know if you have to rezone that property at the
Yeah,
time to do that.
it's PDC.
So if you did do that, you could, and then they would be subject to rezoning the property.
Right. Because that's what, I mean, my thought process, it seems like when we've done planned commercial in the past, the review has been a lot more intensive and the opportunity has been more so than with a special use permit.
That's correct.
That's what I'm thinking the advantage might be for both sides of this equation.
And you do have the authority to request more on plan districts.
Yes.
A full development plan does have to be submitted. That's a good
Exactly.
point.
Exactly.
We would just have to waive the
You'd have
5
to waive
acres.
the lot
Yes.
size requirement, but that doesn't seem to be a complex matter according to the code.
You see anything wrong with that? Any other questions, discussion by board members?
Not on the zoning, but I do on the definition.
Yeah,
And I guess that would be that last sentence.
yeah.
Maybe it's just because I don't,
Well, and I think the word subsidized kind of it throws me off as well, but it's
Okay.
just the fact, I interpreted that as that if there is existing housing, whether it's a house, an apartment building, a hotel, motel, it could be utilized, but it would have to be transferred to the correct zone district.
Yeah, they may operate their own shelters or may subsidize housing, which would be Section 8 funds for existing apartments and things that would be clear for the zoning for those purposes.
It's also mine if you used a hotel or motel, but it fit that you were providing it as a temporary shelter, that it would fall under this definition.
okay.
So someone couldn't just open up a free hotel.
Okay.
Because it would have to fit this definition.
They couldn't disguise it under that
Right,
and then
right.
just say, well, we're a hotel motel, it just doesn't charge anything, and say, no, you fit the definition of a temporary
Okay.
shelter.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments by board?
Samantha, I like where your head's at with the planned development. I think that if it were possible to give also, in addition to M1 and M2, C2 with a planned development overlay, you would have, a greater opportunity for spaces that we could review on a case-by-case basis, as we would have anyway with this.
Anything else by board members?
No, that's an interesting alternative.
We will open it up for discussion. We ask that you come up, introduce yourself, your address, And address the board, you don't address each other, and no shouting or yelling or those type of things from the audience, please. If there's any, come on up. Yep.
Good evening. My name is Mary Price, and I live at 120 Dawn Drive in Washington, Missouri. And I know you all are very familiar with that area, but I happen to have the best house on the block. I also want to tell you that I love Washington, Missouri. I have lived in many different places, and my heart is now in Washington, Missouri. Big reason why is because of the heart of Washington, Missouri. Okay? With that said, I'd like to address the city council, the city planners and administrators, and anyone else. I hope that you are willing to listen to a voice that advocates for the good of the community. As I understand, the zoning for this particular building has been proposed to be changed and would no longer allow it to be used for the requested purpose of providing short-term assistance to people in need. Our town is well known for its volunteerism and helping people in their time of need. What we have already stated as a real need in our community, which is the ability to supply short-term housing, it would not come to fruition with the proposed code changes, possibly. There is a need for space that is easily accessible in order to assist people more readily and provide accountability. This type of building cannot be placed in a location that is outside of town. From what we understand, the building that we propose to use for short-term assistance is now being considered to become the first medical marijuana dispensary for our city. I have nothing against medical marijuana, but I wonder how this type of use could look to our town's footprint as you enter or leave our city. Whereas you could have a nice-looking, well-kept building named The Bridge that could be used for short-term assistance and would be beneficial to our city, and the people we help would get back on their feet and become citizens who support our community. In closing, I hope you will reconsider this decision to rezone this piece of property and allow us to continue to be a town that helps and gives people dignity in their time of need. I hope that you all listen with your head, but I hope you mainly listen with your heart. I thank you.
Thank you. Let me explain if I could. We're not talking about the rezoning tonight of that parcel of land.
And I think I did not have the proper information on that.
Yeah,
And for
that's
that, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
But
no,
I
that's
want my voice and many, many others heard
Yep.
on the real need for this, and that it will be a very well-kept place. There will be accountability and all those other things that need to happen in order for something like this to be of benefit to our city.
Yep. What we're talking about tonight looking at where in the city code we can put this definition and still have a zoning that would accommodate.
And that was my question to Mr. Lamb a few moments ago. With that existing definition, it says these establishments may operate their own shelters or provide, thank you, subsidized housing using existing homes, apartments, hotels, or motels. It really doesn't state, I don't think clearly, that the place that we would like to propose to be used is no longer a business building as it had been. It's not a home, it's not a hotel, it's not a motel, it's not an apartment. So I don't know if that would fall into.
It still is a commercial
It would still,
property.
from what he was saying, I understand that it would.
Yeah. Once
Okay.
something's zoned a certain way, it stays that way, and it's used that way. Even if the use goes away, it's still zoned that.
It's still zoned that way. So it could possibly be a place for the bridge.
It would have to be rezoned now is what we're looking at to possibly a different zoning. So from a C2, it would have to go to a M1 or M2.
And is there any kind of real possibility that that may happen in our town of Washington?
I have no idea. I honestly, I don't
don't know.
That's why we're here.
I know, and that's why we're here too.
Yep.
Okay, okay. I thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Come on up, please.
Hi, I'm Judy Schneider. I live at 2273 Dukes Way here in Washington. And my question, I guess, is mostly directed to Sal. The M1 and M2 special use permit, I question if that's not for emergency shelters, victims of domestic violence, short-term emergency shelter. We are looking at having a 30-day stay in this area. It's not going to be a nightly thing where a child would be removed from a home at 2 o'clock in the morning and be placed here, or that someone got out of the hospital and would be placed here, a patient family. I think the M1, M2 is used more for that emergency basis, not a planned 30-day stay, and that's really my question to you.
Well, and the M1, M2 is kind of separate from, sounds like you more disagree with the definition itself. So we could interpret, I mean, that's how we would still interpret the definition, whether it's 30 days or not. I think our recommendation is it still fits into that definition.
I think
Still
that-
fits
the
into that
second-
definition.
I think the second,
Not
number
an
two,
emergency.
Right, there-
second part, number two, in the definition, it's and or. Then you read number two, and it's temporary residential shelter. So
Right,
it doesn't
Like-
specify the number of days,
right.
30 in that definition, but you do look at short term, and I would think that would be overnight or 2 nights.
Right.
Where the other part, the second part of that definition would include something you're talking about.
Right.
Like a 30 day.
Because the one we're talking about proposing is not going to be a shelter they can stay the night and go get released in the morning, you know, like a cold weather shelter. Like the homeless people in St. Louis look for a bed for one night. That's not going to be the type of shelter this is. And I wonder if we're not placing emergency housing in the same category as the bridge proposal.
Yeah, no, I'm following. I think our interpretation is that it
But-
does still fit into there.
Right, but as we're saying, the number two is saying temporary shelter.
You would like to
it's
see
like
two different
30.
zonings,
I'd like
one
to
for,
see two different.
different
One
definitions,
for overnight or
Emergency.
emergency cases, and then something else for a 30-day program.
okay,
That's what I'd like.
okay.
Okay, thank you.
Come on up.
Hi, Annie Foncannon, and I actually met 335 Nathan Drive, Foley, Missouri, but I work down here in Franklin County. For one, first of all, the definition that's currently being proposed on shelters, please understand what else unintended consequences that fall under this. When you're talking about short-term emergency shelter for child abuse and or neglect, you're talking about Grace's Place, Crisis Nursery. So I know it would be grandfathered in, but let's say that Grace's Place, which is growing tremendously quickly, wants to expand. They are currently seeing kids up to 17, almost 18 years old, basically, up to 18 years old. And they want to separate and have a shelter that is specific to teenagers and then one that's for the younger kids. So now you're going to stick teenagers out into an industrial area that's away from their school, away from them getting to their after-school programs, away from them having jobs that they normally have at Hardee's and McDonald's and Taco Bell, and they don't have transportation to get there. You're putting a great burden on organizations like Grace's Place by this definition. Another part of this definition that you may want to look into is the fact that it also includes those in medical crisis. So if we ever have a Ronald McDonald House down here, or the equivalent that is out there for veterans, they would have to go into an industrial area. We couldn't have that by the hospital where they'd be close to their loved ones. I mean, there is a lot of unintended consequences with this current definition and having it zoned out into M1 and M2. I understand the special use permit. Many of the communities that I have worked with throughout my career have special use permits for all kinds of things, including domestic violence shelters and shelters for runaway and homeless youth. But putting them out in an industrial area where they don't have access to the actual needs, the care needs, they don't have access to the Macaulay Clinic and to the job center and things that they can actually walk to, is putting a great burden on them. I was just looking around, and one of the things I found is that there is an APA, American Planning Association, guide on homelessness. And what they say in section A5 of the Code of Ethics is that planners must strive to expand choice and opportunity for all persons, recognizing a special responsibility to plan for the needs of disadvantaged groups. Sticking them out in an industrial area is not responsible planning for disadvantaged groups. It's shoving them to the wayside, shoving our kids, our homeless children that we have that are 15, 16, 17-year-olds out to the wayside instead of bringing them within our community. We currently have one young man, and I won't give his name since I haven't asked his permission, who is 17 years old. Him and his brother probably should have been recognized and taken by Children's Division when they were 8 or 9 years old. They have been living most of their teenage lives at the hotel with a heroin-addicted father who actually has a decent job and goes every single day and works. But he pays for the hotel because he doesn't want to save his money to get an apartment because he's shooting in his arm. But we had 2 teenagers stuck in this cycle for years, and they both decided they were done, and so they went and couch surfed, and they were couch surfing and going from home to home to home to home. And Lindsay was working with them and finally found a host family, a couple that was willing to take them in because that's the only option that we had. We were lucky with these kids. It doesn't mean we're going to be lucky with the next. The youngest of those 2 has a job. He is graduating Washington this week, so in this spring. He is getting ready. They have taught him how to drive and getting ready to get his driver's license and working. He has saved $2,000 to get a car, towards getting a car. And he is registered to go, or it's going to East Central in the fall and is already accepted at Ozark in the spring. This kid wants to be a special education teacher. This is one kid we were able to help, but we have a lot of kids out there that we are unable to place in host families or have any place to go, and we are currently, they're either couch surfing, or we have some that are living out of cars, or we have some that are living out of tents. We need a place for them, and it's not in an industrial area.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Come on up.
Hi, everybody. I'm Karen Dawson. I live at 1207 Caroline Drive. I know Teacher Ghetto area. I am the president of Harvest Table, a member of the Homeless Task Force, and a member of the Bridge Resource Center Developmental Committee. I work with the homeless. I taught school for 40 years. Now I work with the homeless. On any given Saturday night at Harvest Table, we see between 8 and 12 people who are homeless. Hard to believe, isn't it? And you know what? They're pretty doggone nice. I know the picture of homelessness is scary. I do understand that, and we get in our mindset the pictures we see of St. Louis or Kansas City. Washington, Missouri's homeless don't look much like that at all. They don't have anything. They don't have a shopping cart, not a one of them. Everything they own is on a backpack on their back. And yet, in the last 3 years, on our work by ourselves with no money, we've gotten 19 of them into apartments and jobs. Not a one of them has missed a monthly payment on that rent. I think that's incredible, and I firmly believe that if we have a resource center here, we can do that for a lot of people. They need a little dignity. They need a bath. They need to have their hair cut, but they need to feel human. When you dehumanize anyone, bad things can happen. And it's changing. The last 2 weeks, 2 weeks ago on Saturday night, I had a 17-year-old girl who came in who had given birth 12 hours earlier. Because she doesn't have insurance, her baby was still in the hospital, but she wasn't. She was traveling with another 17-year-old and her boyfriend, who's 6 months pregnant now. She's not been able to get any prenatal care because she's 17 in that no man's land and doesn't have insurance. If she got Medicare, she could probably get in. However, if you don't have somebody there to help you learn how to do it, how are you going to do it? You're 17, you're pregnant, you're scared, you're living in a basement with 5 other teenagers. We need a place. I love education. We need a place to help teach them, to help show them how, because I've seen it work, and I know it can. And that's the answer. Humanize what you think are some bad people. Oh, there's some rotten eggs out there. And there was one who was a very rotten egg for almost 8 years. He was one who was well known in Washington, pretty much drunk every time you saw him. And yet he was incredibly likable. And he was a good person to the other people that were homeless. He was referred to by the homeless, excuse me, Miss Lucy, but he was the mayor of homelessness. And he would come and tell me when there was a single woman or young people living down at the park or wherever they were. He said, now, Miss Karen, make sure people watch out for them. So he had a good side, but you always wondered what would happen to him. But about 8 months ago, with the help from his sisters, he got an apartment, and he got to clean himself up. So he looked good and didn't smell bad, and then got a job here in town. He's working 7 days a week if they let him. I ran into him yesterday. I hadn't seen him for a couple months. And he came running up, tears running down his face, and said, Miss Karen, I'm doing so good. I am so proud of you, I said. I'm so proud of you. And he said, yeah, and the best thing is I have really nice furniture. And I thought, how great to be proud of what you can do. This was never meant to be an impairment on any neighbors, to in any way hurt anybody. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't want to hurt anybody's property values. We honestly thought that this place was a decent place. But I have to agree, fostering people out to an industrial park that's about 3 miles from the center of town for people who have no transportation, who have to walk, or if you're a 17-year-old pregnant girl, that's a pretty good walk. And I know I couldn't really tell on your map where places were, but I'm wondering if it's even conceivable within our city. And I love our city more than you can possibly know. But I remember what my very German grandmother always told me. She said it in German, so I hope I'm translating it right. My Oma would say, when I would want something that we didn't have the money for, my Oma would say, remember, and I hope you'll listen, the things you do for yourself in your life, those die with you. But the things you do for others, those are immortal. Let's have a chance for immortality. What do you say?
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
Angela Holmes, 2975 Highway A, Washington. I'm just going to ask Sal if he can put the map back up, because I think there seems to be some confusion as to where the industrial zoning is, because it looked like it was right at Jefferson and kind of right in the center of town. So I just for clarification purposes, I'm asking Sal to put the map back up.
She's trying to see where the industrial locations are in Washington. we're not necessarily talking about just the industrial tract that we're familiar with. We do have other industries in the town and zoned industrial. And it is hard to tell. I mean, it's not easy. It's gray. Sal can go over it again. That,
This is Jefferson, this is 8th. Is that what you're talking about? This is Sporland right here.
Jefferson.
Jefferson
Jefferson
Products.
Products.
Is that an empty lot across from?
C1.
The Patients First area is still zoned
Yeah,
commercial.
Patients First is still industrial.
Patients first, Sal.
Is the other part. That's still,
Yeah. This is 10th. Yes.
Along with the old Hazel. The old Hazel and everything too.
Well, never know.
Gotta get him up to the mic.
yeah.
Please come on up, whoever.
Hello, my name is Lindsay Jasper. My address is 4498 Highway 185. And I'm a social worker that I've worked in the town of Washington for 7 years. My biggest concern, if you have a chance, could you put the definition back up there? Sorry. My biggest concern is, and I understand, like, there's industrial, heavy and light, and would this be considered used for heavy industrial or light, or both?
It's just, it would be a special use in both.
In both, okay. I would. My biggest concern when I look at this is that it could be limiting on availability. Like, I see that it's sprinkled throughout, and that makes me feel a little bit more comfortable about different options. But I worry not only just for the possibility of the bridge going there, but I feel like it's limiting in what it could be available for that center. I also get worried about the availability for all those other items listed in this definition about availability of space and places. When you say, like, subsidized housing using existing homes, apartments, hotels, and motels, I feel like it could be very limiting on what is actually available. And that's why I think, if it's more broad, there's just more opportunity.
If I may, it does say operate your own shelter before that. So
Does that include that, or is it separate from the
the way it
subsidized
reads to
housing?
me is these establishments may operate their own shelters or may subsidize housing using existing homes, apartments, hotels, or motels.
Okay, I was reading it a little bit different, but I still feel like it could be very limiting in what is just happens to be available in those areas. I work with teens that are homeless, and so I just want whatever, possibilities, and I really look at this, and actually almost everything in this definition is an investment in our community. And I consider Washington my community because that's where I do all of my business. This is where I work. But I look at this as an investment in our families and our kids and our people that are at most risk, and giving them opportunities to then become more successful citizens within our community is an investment. Just like we would invest in how we look physically and invest in better jobs and housing, I feel like that this is no different. And if we want, 10 years down the road, like the student that Annie was discussing, that's been an investment. And had he not been helped with several services, he would be high possibilities of becoming just like his father, using drugs. But with all the investments of all this community, and the community has really helped him in lots of different ways, he has the opportunity to come back here and be a successful community member. And that is really what I look at. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Sean Mayall at 145 Monticello Drive, Washington. And first of all, I'd just like to state that I think everybody in the room, hopefully everybody in the room, Nobody is against homeless people or people that are down on their luck. I know, a lot of things that were said this evening are great thoughts. I live in this community, I love this community, and I know this community does a lot for a lot of people in this community. Unfortunately, what we've not talked about, and I apologize, I was out of town during the open house or the workshop, so I did not get a listen in on that. But having been a citizen, having been a business owner, having been in the community, there's a lot of heavy cons that outweigh the pros in a homeless shelter. And what has not been talked about is the repercussion and the consequences of what a shelter brings. Washington homeless people might be great people, and we're talking about a little bit over a handful of people, and if I'm wrong, somebody can let me know that. But those are great people. They've been from here, but the issue is, and I think everybody knows deeply, that when you open a homeless shelter, that there's going to be a neon open sign over this community or any community that opens a homeless shelter that allows everybody to send people and homeless people to come to Washington, Missouri, and that's going to be an issue. I could argue all day long that when you have a shelter, people are going to be shipped in from all around different areas, and then Washington, we are going to have to deal with dozens and dozens and probably hundreds of people. They're going to have to be turned away. Now, when they go to a shelter and they're turned away, what's Washington going to do? What's the community going to do? What's the group going to do when there's dozens lined up to get in the community that might be a building that might only be housed for 12 people? Who's going to deal with the overflow when everybody is coming into Washington, Missouri to stay at these shelters? That's going to be the issues. And it's not fair. It's not fair for a homeowner in town or any homeowners to be faced with this type of shelter and issue that would be beyond the 12 people, the 12 local Washington homeless people. It's not fair to the houses around that's going to be there. Not only property values, we all know that when homeless people get turned away, where are they going to go? Where are they going to filter through? And unfortunately, when you have a lot of homeless people, there's going to be a lot of bad coming with that. And there's going to be crime, and there's going to be a lot of issues, because we're going to have a ton of people coming together that are all trying to stay at one place. Now, I know we have a lot of service organizations and a lot of organizations in this town that do support a lot of people that are down on their luck. And I know that this community wants to give. You know, my advice would be, if we only have 10 or 12 homeless people and people that are down on their luck, why don't we all help boost Loving Hearts and different clubs, different organizations, different places where people can go to get food and try to get information on how to get back on track. But I'm very, very concerned that whether it be industrial, whether it be in the city limits, I'm worried about what's going to happen when we do this. And there's absolutely no way anybody in this room can control homeless people being sent to Washington, Missouri. It is happening now. There's no way nobody in the room is going to be able to control that. And all I'm asking, I'm here as neutral as can be, and I hope we can figure out a way to get along. These are great people behind me on both sides. We're all citizens of this community. I think we've all noted that. There's got to be other options, but I'm just telling us up front what the repercussion and what the consequences are going to be that come along with a shelter. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to say again, this is not going to be a shelter that would house people coming for one night, 2 nights. So as far as a neon sign saying homeless stay here, there won't be one. Also, I'd like to say that the Harvest Table has been a community service for the past 8 years, and we do serve homeless people there. But we also have seniors, we have some families that come. We have young kids, college kids. It's people of all ages. And for 8 years, we've been offering this free meal. And the people haven't come from other places because we got a neon sign. Ours is not neon, but we do put a sign out on the curb, free meal. So think about that too.
Good evening. My name's Larry Primsey. Everybody calls me Cowboy. You can call me whatever you want. I own Cowboys Holdings, which has several properties here in the city of Washington. We have monthly rentals. We have several nightly rentals. I own the John B. Bush Historic Brewery. Most of you know where that is. It's a wedding and event venue here. I have several other companies and businesses that I'm involved in here in Washington, Missouri. I'm also a city contractor. I do work for the city here. I've done work with them for, I don't know, probably 30 years. I've got a large investment in this community, in this area, and it is a place that I'm proud to work in. I have a very good relationship with the mayor, with the people in the city committees here that have worked with me on construction projects and buildings that we've built and things that we've done here. I could sit here and preach back the other side of this and tell you about the drug addicts and the people that have urinated in our buildings and the people we've had to throw out of wedding receptions and all that. But I'm not going to do that because what this is this is a zoning issue, and it's pretty simple. I applaud the city staff for coming up with this definition, which of course meets a national standard. I did a little research myself. I did look it up. I think that they're right on point with that. I think the really big issue here is requiring a special use permit, because I think that any time that one of these facilities comes to somebody's community, that all of the neighbors, and not just the ones within 180 feet of it, need to be able to address their concerns about it. These people have said that if this happens, that it's not going to draw other people, but the fact is that it does. They have a warming center now, most of you probably know this, at the hospital. So when the weather's cold, they bring people from all over Franklin County. They bring them here to the warming center, and then at 8 o'clock in the morning, they kick them out on the streets. The people that brought them here from Catawissa or wherever they came from, or other cities in this county, to bring them to that warming center, they don't come pick them up in the morning. They're here. They're here every day. They've created problems in our businesses and created problems for us to deal with. And the other thing that I will definitely tell you is that it has an effect on property value. These people will tell you that it won't affect the value of adjoining property. That is not true. And the reason why zoning ordinances like this exist is so that one person's property can't be negatively affected, or their lives be negatively affected, by a neighboring property with an incompatible use. So I applaud the fact that you guys have asked for a special use permit. As far as M1 and M2 zoning issues, they're scattered all through the city. I mean, I can read a map, and we saw where they were at, and I'd be happy to take the time to point out where they all are. If that's a recommendation of the committee, I certainly agree with that. I don't have a problem with that, as long as these all require special use permits. The whole idea that this won't have an impact on the community is not true. It is definitely not true. For those of you who haven't seen the video or watched the video, Seattle's Dying, I suggest you look at that before you vote on this. Just take the time to, and when you look at that, watch it all the way to the end, because the end part, in my opinion, is the best. And all I'm saying is that for other business people just like me that have large investments here in this city, I am most respectful of the fact that you guys are taking that into consideration with this ordinance. Because this is not saying you can't have a homeless shelter. This is not saying we don't like you. What this is saying is that we're going to protect the rights of adjacent property owners. And that is the duty of this committee, to do that. And I applaud the city staff for bringing this forward, and I applaud you guys for making the right decision. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else that would like to speak?
My name is John Morton. I'm sorry for being a little late. I had a meeting. I own 3 of the properties that adjoin this facility, and I've already had problems with homeless that have been hanging at some of my properties now. I just think it's a bad area for it to be. It's not zoned properly.
I'm sorry.
Larry explained.
I'll bring you up to speed. Yeah, that part's been, they withdrew their application for Franklin Street.
Okay.
So Avenue, that's no longer on the agenda.
The only thing we're discussing tonight is the code amendment on where they can go in the future. They're not actually proposing any specific site tonight.
Done. Sorry for addressing.
Oh, that's okay,
that's
that's okay.
You're fine.
No, that's right. Anybody else in the audience would like to speak? Okay.
I still have one more question, Sal, about that last sentence yet. And I'm sorry I'm hung up on that, but these establishments may operate their own shelters, which would be standalone, just a shelter, okay? Or they may subsidize housing using existing homes. So they could pay for a homeless family to move into another home on a month-by-month or on that 30-day period. Do I interpret that correctly?
Yes, that's how I interpret it as well, that it could, say they purchase an apartment building, but they have to get it zoned, get a special use permit, and then they could bring families in, homeless people in, on a month-by-month, day-by-day, hour-by-hour basis, whatever they wanted to do.
Okay, so then basically those people would not be at the standalone shelter. They would be on remote somewhere, anywhere in the city or anywhere in the community.
Well,
If that building's being operated as the temporary shelter, then they would have to get the special use permit, whether it's one unit or all the units.
So if they were going to go to an existing home, they would have to come back to us and get a special use permit for that residential home to operate it as a shelter.
Correct.
And rezone it, right?
And rezone it, because
Okay.
like I said, if it
Then
was
that clears it up.
residentially, depending on what the zoning district was, but the way that reads, that just, like I said, it prohibits somebody from taking a facility that looks like an existing home, apartment, hotel, motel, and if they're using it for a temporary shelter rather than a hotel, motel, or an apartment that would
Okay.
normally be, if they're disguising it as that, I mean, I don't want to make it sound like they're trying to hide something. I'm just saying that if it's
Right.
being used for that purpose, then the city can say, no, it's a temporary shelter, and you fit this definition, and you got to have a special use permit and be within our districts.
Okay.
Because I think the confusion is it almost sounds like they could have a facility, like say that they have a main office, and then they have satellite sites.
That's what I was.
That's what it sounds like.
That's what it sounds like.
And if they did have satellite sites, the city would be saying, no, those satellite sites are, if they fit our definition of a temporary shelter, they cannot be located there.
So do we need to perhaps add something to that to say, however, any satellite sites must also fall into the proper zoning district?
It's actually
I don't
more
think so.
general this way.
I'm sorry.
It's covered. I feel it's.
I just want to make sure there's no confusion.
Yeah, I think, again, that last sentence is just to go ahead and make sure that if somebody is using one of those, a home, an apartment, a hotel, or a motel, and they are using it as a temporary shelter, that the city can say, no, this is a temporary, you're using this as a temporary shelter, and you can no longer do that because of its impact to surrounding uses. Or at least without that review.
Do you see this hurting places like Grace's Place? And if they want to move, it's going to be more challenging for them to find someplace else?
I think if you limit it to M1, M2, and we were, I really don't personally have any issue if we want to go ahead and make it in a planned district commercial. If you want to do that, they would have to rezone the property. So somebody could go ahead and propose that. We have no problem with adding that to the definitions, if you want to add that to M1 and M2 and that planned district commercial. Then if they do find some property that's not, and say it's closer to the services that they're looking for, it's subject to coming before you and the city council. And in that case, it would have to be rezoned. They'd be facing the same, maybe they may be facing the same challenges that they did with the property that was up there on 47, but still they could go ahead and propose that.
It seems to me that if we did a PDC, it would be a more intensive review and a better opportunity for all sides to contribute to the process.
There is more you have to submit for a PDC up
Yes.
front than there is for a special use permit.
Correct.
And that was my reason for suggesting that.
And you can, and on the ordinance, you can list all of the conditions, again, just similar to like a special use permit, you can list all of those conditions. We've done that before with regards to the planned districts and saying,
Yes.
this has to meet this has to meet the site
Exactly.
plan, this has to do all those things. So,
Thank you, Darren, and I appreciate your explanation there, and nothing against you, but I'd also like to ask council to make sure we're
absolutely.
clear on that, too.
That's why he's here.
I know that's why he's here.
What's an example of a planned district we currently have that maybe is for something else? Just so,
Duncan.
Holdinghausen's.
Diane Holdinghausen's was C4,
Yeah.
Duncan's was C4. We have not had any new ones since
Right, since this
since
change.
2017. But Duncan's, which is undeveloped, but on Duncan Avenue, Diane Holdinghouse.
oh, you know what?
Yeah.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
it
Where
just,
they have to
ding,
submit-
ding, ding, ding.
No, it's
Okay,
okay. They have
I
to
got
do a
it.
site plan,
So,
an actual
you have to have
engineered
the
site
site
plan up
plan,
front.
okay.
Yeah, the urgent
Yeah.
care facility. was
Yes,
one
yes.
That was probably the most recent one that's come before
I,
us.
sorry. Y'all know what we're talking about?
The total access urgent care.
It's comparable to what we used to do with C4. Not exactly,
Right,
but
it
it's
used to be called
comparable.
C4, that's why, because we
Right.
haven't had one that's come up since it's
Right.
PDC. So,
Okay.
that's why, right, that's
Okay.
different.
They would have to show everything,
And
fences, everything where it's located.
Yeah.
Changes,
before Mark-
elevations.
Right, because we've talked in there about hours of operation, we've gotten very, very specific on those, and that's why, again, my mind was going that direction because of how specific we can get and how much input the surrounding property owners or anyone in the community can have about it.
Yes.
Good evening. My name
pull it
Pull
down.
that
Pull
down.
it down.
Good evening. My name is Jolene Patterson. I live at 715 West 2nd Street in Washington, and I just have a clarification point. I work with a couple of programs around here, including the Homeless Council, but with reestablishing homes for youth that are disadvantaged and in crisis. And part of the problem is that with the youth programs, we are often called and asked to find them shelters that are temporary shelters for the night. And that would definitely seem to fall into these classifications. And we put them into residential homes. Does that mean that every residential home that we're placing these children into would then need to be reclassified as M1 or M2 and get special permits?
Are these minor children?
Yes, they are.
So there's an adult that owns the house?
Yes, there is.
And it's out of the goodness of their heart, and they're not making money, and it's
That's
not
correct.
run as a shelter?
That's correct.
That would be sticky, but I don't think that that would require extra zoning.
I suppose you could twist it to define it as foster homes, but I can't imagine that that's how that would be defined at all.
Mark, what?
Most of the
I
business,
think it has to be
Aaron needs to clarify.
a primary use of the property has to be as a
Right.
shelter. If it's a home that they're, as,
Right,
if there's-
primarily engaged is.
Yes.
The minors are not renting it for that purpose.
Or
right?
primarily engaged. I
Going
mean,
to
that's-
maybe the extreme example, somebody mentioned couch surfing. If
Right.
somebody, some homeless teen is couch surfing at somebody else's house, that doesn't automatically make that house a temporary shelter.
Right, they're not primarily engaged in providing a couch surfing location.
well, that's correct. Well, I mean, but if you look at many of the businesses around town, whether you look at the YMCA, the Washington Historical Center, or many of the other businesses, they all have signs in their windows that say, if there's a youth in crisis, you can call this number.
The key word primarily engaged.
Yeah. But some of these families, they do this on a regular basis.
But they're primarily a family residence.
That's correct.
They're not primarily engaged in operating a shelter.
And they can continue to do that without any changes.
And so there will be no implications or impact to any of those homes or families or youth programs.
Right.
We assume that the families live in those homes and they're.
That's correct.
behind. So they're essentially a foster home.
So in the same sense, then, if a homeless shelter here in town placed a homeless person in someone's home on a temporary basis, that would also fall into those same classifications?
yes.
We would assume so unless that becomes a location that's primarily engaged in providing the shelter. If that is the primary purpose of the property, that's a different story.
Thank you for the clarification.
Sure.
Here I am again. Where do churches fall into all of this? You know,
Which way do you mean?
well, what would happen if a religious organization or a church would decide to provide?
Is the church going to be a primary
Right, are they, are they
It's a
primarily
church.
a church?
If,
or are they
I'm just,
Right, that's what we're saying. Are they primarily a church?
they would be a church.
Okay, then they don't fall under that definition.
They don't fall, so they
church,
could,
well, opens
they
up their
could
basement.
provide resources and a place to stay for people on a temporary basis.
I mean, are they are they primarily a
Yeah.
church or are they primarily a shelter? That's.
Well,
think
I
that's-
would say they're primarily a church. That's what I'm thinking of.
They can be a church with a warming shelter or, you know, some kind of temporary residence, but they can't be a temporary residence with a church. It's got to be a church with,
But they can't, the church can't provide temporary
yes.
shelter and give the whoever they are resources in order to get their
Yes.
lives back in gear?
Yes, that's what I'm saying, they can.
They can.
Yeah.
What
they
is the
can.
primary
As long as-
purpose is what we're saying. The
Yeah.
primary purpose is being a church.
And a mission to the, and their mission would be to work with, to help people.
Well, if they are no longer primarily a religious organization or a church and they are masquerading as something else, they could fall under this.
It would be a church that would want to go out maybe and get a separate facility
Yeah.
and get that.
Probably
And they would
so.
have to rezone that facility, not the
The
church.
facility.
Right.
Yeah, the facility.
Because
And then
that
we're
becomes
still
a-
falling in the same
Right. That
area
becomes a
that we've been
primary-
talking about for.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
But-
Because this is, what we're talking about is not a shelter, so to speak, it's a resource center.
Right.
You know, I think we need to look at something like that and not, and it does, and as has been said before, it's not going to bring in people from outside our city because it's not going to be, that's where the accountability comes in. That's not what it's going to be all about.
And
It's helping whoever is here and wants to come out of their homeless status. We do have more than 6 or 7 or whatever it was named a while ago. We
Ma'am,
have a lot of homeless people in this city.
Ma'am, with all due respect, we are not tonight talking about any particular facility.
No, I know that.
We are just talking about how can we, if we are going to alter the code to
Yeah.
enable something like this to happen.
So you're trying to figure out the correct wording or the proper wording
talking about a
for
code
that
amendment
particular
tonight.
thing.
The best way to fit them into our zoning codes. So
Okay.
that if somebody comes to us again and says, I want to do this, we can say, here's the code, here's where you can go.
So that's what you're really doing tonight is,
Yes.
is
Yes.
the actual wording of the code.
Right, we are
Yes.
not discussing any
Okay.
particular idea, facility, et cetera.
Okay.
We are just discussing the city code.
And I guess that's where we want to make sure, certain that, you know, it's
Yep.
going to be broad enough to be able to withstand people's ideas about how to help people in this city.
Yep.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to make one clarification, though. If you do have a church and you want to have people stay there overnight, you are changing the use of that church. And we
No,
have to
church
meet
is a
the-
sanctuary.
But if you have people, a church is not an overnight stay, and the code would not allow, the building code I'm speaking about now, would not allow overnight residence without meeting the building code requirements for a residence. So that, what I'm saying is, if you had a basement, you'd have to have us 2 ways out of that basement. You'd have to have a smoke alarm system. You'd have to meet the requirements for life safety if you were going to allow that to happen.
I'm not, I don't have a church that I can do that, but,
that would
I'm
be-
just saying that.
but I'm just throwing it out there because I think that's something you need to think about as well.
Church could put in, you know, if they wanted to residence somebody overnight, they could do that. No, that you would have to meet the requirements of the life safety code to do that and have somebody spending the
Okay.
night at a church. So
But
that's
I
why
think churches do have a lot of people spending the night at their churches, maybe not because they're homeless, but for other reasons.
But they're not sleeping there.
Yeah. I've slept in a church many a time.
I mean, John, I think sometimes there.
I've slept in a church many a time,
Or something
too.
like
Okay.
that. That might-
What I'm saying,
even during the sermons.
Good point. Any other questions? Comments? Yes.
I have a small question. Good evening, I'm Caleb Reed. I live at 527 East 6th Street in Washington, Missouri. I'm a new attorney here in Franklin County. I know Mr. Mark Biontek. I know you, Ms. Wacker. I'm here because, more importantly than that, I'm a citizen of Washington. I was born and raised here. It's home for me. After going to law school, I came back to Washington to live and to hopefully have a successful law practice. That's yet to be determined. And so I have faith in the city of Washington. I love it, and I wanted to see it prosper. And so because of that, I am also a new property owner in the city of Washington. And I share some of the concerns voiced by some of the other people over here on the left side of the commission, this room. It seems like it naturally divided that way. I don't know. That just works out that way sometimes.
Pull the mic closer to you, Caleb, would you please?
Right.
Thank you, hon.
I think that, obviously we're not here about any specific piece of, rezoning. Specifically as regards the amendment, I have a few questions about, what are the requirements for industrial zoning? Are the plots, do they have to be larger than regular commercial zoning? Or, what kind of addition, is it more difficult for it to be an industrial zoning than the commercial zoning?
Yes, so we do not have minimum lot sizes for industrial. So if they find a piece of property that is not zoned industrial, that would not hinder them. I will say it is harder, or in those terms, it is more difficult to get industrial zoning approved where it is not currently at, because of the fact that it has to be in an appropriate area. Obviously, industrial, as it is more intensive, is meant to be set away from more residential and commercial uses. So if it is in the middle of a commercial area, it would be difficult to get a recommendation of approval from staff for industrial property.
So since we're kind of all arguing about whether or not it should be industrial or commercial, can you kind of lay out some of those specific requirements that are the difference between commercial and industrial zoning?
Well, there's hundreds of uses in our code book. It's any type of manufacturing or any type of outdoor storage, anything that's a little bit more intensive than general retail goes into industrial.
I think more specifically, the question I'm trying to ask is, what are the requirements for something to be rezoned from, maybe it's currently commercial or maybe it's currently residential, in order to get it to be rezoned to become industrial?
There's no minimum requirements for rezoning. It's case by case basis. So it's all wherever they decide to request that rezoning. If that area is appropriate for it, it can get a recommendation of approval, and then it can go through council, commission, and council.
Okay.
Yes.
We like to keep zoning in areas, residential, commercial, industrial, kind of stay together usually.
Okay.
I mean, we look to that comprehensive plan, but then we also look to how are the uses evolving since the time that the comp plan was put into place. And that's why the comp plan gets reviewed and revised every 10 years, because sometimes there are changes.
Okay.
Some of the things down, like Jefferson Products and stuff, it was, those buildings were in before many of the other areas were zoned around it as far as residential and all those kind of things. So you've got, if you're wanting to put something else, M1, M2, it's going to have to be next to probably one of the existing M1, M2 if it's going to be something downtown other than out in the west industrial tract.
Okay. Well, I mean, it looked to me like from the map that you guys pulled up earlier that it's primarily in the industrial that already exists is around Jefferson Street and out in the actual industrial park, a few other, spots here and there. The issue that I think that most of the other, people that have already voiced their concerns, I'm not going to revoice them, are specific towards the impact that any potential future temporary shelter could have on surrounding property values. So if any temporary shelter were to come to Washington, I guess I'm just asking, based on the current map, without having to account for any future rezoning, what kind of buffer zone would we be looking at between current residential and industrial zoning?
All right. There's no minimum buffer set in the code. It's all, again, based on where they propose it.
Okay,
But
so,
wouldn't that be part of the special use permit then also?
Yeah, so
Oh.
when the special use permit came into that industrial district, it could be said, okay, you need to have, if it's a large enough property, you need to be X amount of feet from that property line.
Or if we went to the PDC zoning, we can get down to the specific type of tree, the color of the fence, the height of the fence, and it very detailed.
all right. Well, I don't have any questions. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Any other discussion by board members, questions?
One of the questions that I have been asked over the last couple of weeks is who ultimately will be the governing body of the homeless,
The bridge?
I know originally when you talked about it, it was a resource center.
Yes.
And then we've now gone to the homeless shelter.
No, we still said a resource center.
Well, most everyone's talking about a homeless shelter.
Yes.
So anyway,
Fortunately, they're-
I mean, I haven't heard that word for a while. So anyway, but who ultimately is going to be the governing body of this? I know that the Homeless Task Force is made up of service providers throughout Franklin County, but I can't imagine that this is going to be the governing board and who is ultimately going to be responsible if we need to approach someone.
We are actually working currently, it will be its own 501c3 and will have its own governing board, just like any other 501c3. So therefore, like Grace's Place or Franklin County CASA or Children's Advocacy Center, it would have its own governing board. We are actually currently looking within the next week or two to solidify who's going to be on that board and work on our 501c3 at this point. So they would be. The Franklin County service providers and the homeless task force yes, they knew about this and we reported in that because that's where a lot of questions were asked, but really there's been a separate group all along that's made up of a lot of the same people, but the separate group is the one like Karen, myself, Lindsay, Chief Menifee are people that have been on the actual building committee and looking at the bridge itself. So if that makes sense. And one thing I did want to say is it truly is, I can see that there was many people that did miss the community forum because a lot of the things that were brought up as issues I addressed in that community forum with actual statistical information to back them up, not just information that I pulled out of fear or out of what I think. It was information that I actually researched and pulled information together to show that homeless shelters or different homeless centers throughout the community and their effects on their community. And what we have found is that they do not bring in people in droves, that we do not send, just like we do not send people in droves to the Salvation Army in O'Fallon. If they are full, we don't send people there. If Agape House is full, we do not send people to Agape House. That is the same way it would work if we had a small center here that housed people overnight, is that most of the community is very respectful about communicating and saying, do you have a slot available? So, and I know there was a lot of fear about people coming in from St. Louis, and I think the gentleman the night of the community forum, the black gentleman that was a veteran, said it best. He's like, they ain't coming here. They know better. They're not going to come here. It is resource rich for the homeless in St. Louis. There is a lot of options. We don't have a lot of options. We're just trying to give an option. As I said that evening, the group that has gotten together, it is because we heard a lot of people complaining about the homeless in the community, and we actually got together to do something about it.
So was the place, will it be staffed by volunteers, or will there be a director of the
There will be,
center?
currently what we're looking at is, to start off with, is 2 full-time staff members, an executive director, and a case manager. And then we would have overnight RAs that would be volunteer. I went and visited a facility in Joplin, Missouri that's absolutely amazing. It's called Watered Gardens. Anybody can check it out. They have a great reputation in Joplin. And Watered Gardens has 60 volunteers that rotate staying overnight so that there is an overnight RA every night. They also have a facility there that has expanded. It's called The Forge, and it is a longer-term facility for men who, it's a 6-month placement actually, that are working on getting jobs. They're teaching them all kinds of skills. And that one actually has an RA that was a formerly homeless individual who works outside of the place and then stays there as the RA at night, and that's how his room and board is being the RA. So in our case, we would be looking at probably overnight RAs, or residential assistants, kind of like college, that would be volunteers, but then the staff that are actually working day in and day out would be the 2 full-time staff.
Okay. Are you developing a business plan and do you have plans for the need for ongoing funding?
Yes, we are looking at what it would look like for ongoing funding. The donor has committed to at least a couple of years of operating expenses at this point. So that gives us time to be able to look for other grant opportunities and to build the resources within the community.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Any other questions or discussion by board members?
Oops, here comes somebody.
Hi, Tony Kevin, 522 West Front Street. I don't have a dog in this fight. I honestly came here to hear both sides because I really wanted to know what was going on with it. But I do have a question relative to this phrasing for temporary shelters. And you have mentioned repeatedly that people would not be staying for one night or two.
If you could, ma'am.
Sorry, just wanted
to address us.
They've mentioned several times it wouldn't be a 1 or 2 night thing. Having owned many rental properties, the problem becomes when they stay more than 28 days. What happens if it ends up being like where you have to go into eviction procedures to get someone out? If they then decide to make this their permanent home, that would then violate this temporary shelter concept. And how would you go about getting them out? And how do you address, do you put them out in the street for one night and then let them back in so that, you know what I'm saying? I just really don't know the answer to that question. I'm wondering from the other side, how do you get people out of there that it doesn't become their permanent home?
I can say, it's really not a planning and zoning issue, though.
That's probably a law enforcement issue.
Yeah, that'd be between the property owner.
We're just trying to find a place to put it now. A lot of that stuff will come on the other side. There's a lot to figure out if that comes about. We're just trying to find a place to put something like this right now in our zoning code.
And we'd be more than happy to answer people's questions
Yeah.
afterwards. It's not a CNC issue.
Any other questions, comments by board members?
Frankly, my inclination when it's time to make a motion would be to add to the proposed M1 and M2 with special use that it also be a permitted use within PDC.
And I would second that if you brought it as a motion.
I think it's time then.
Okay, well, I'm making that motion. then, Tom. That's my
Okay.
motion, is to motion to approve this definition as a permitted special use permit in M1 and M2 and a permitted use in PDC.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. Thank you very much for all your input tonight.
So this will be heard as a public hearing next Monday, the 20th, at City Council. We will just amend that one slide to add the revisions. So,
Okay.
Thank you.
and before it gets too loud, I do have just real quick other business. Our subcommittee that we are creating.
Wait, we're not adjourned yet.
Wait.
That's our meeting. So,
Sorry,
Okay.
we're still having some business, so if you want to talk, please talk outside or just wait, and you're welcome to stay here as long as you want.
So just quickly, our subcommittee for our comprehensive plan that we talked about, City Council did nominate 2 members to be our liaisons on that. And so it'll be Mark Hydrich and Jeff Packey, our 2 council liaisons. And I think we did have 3 volunteers with, I think Chuck, did you? Yeah, Chuck, John, and Tom volunteered to be on that. If anyone else wants to be, let me know. And then we are going to get some community stakeholders as well. We will meet quarterly at 6 o'clock before this meeting. So 4 times a year, you'll just have to come an hour early to discuss. It will not just be plan zoning related, because the comprehensive plan does get into everything from economic development to water and sewer, so we'll get other department heads in and make sure we update those goals and objectives. We give a report on that annually for the next 5 years, and then in 2024, we will come up with we will budget for a new comprehensive plan. So just to let you know.
That's not that far away.
It is not.
Any other business by the board? If not, I'll entertain one last motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So moved.
You know, Sheena texted me at one point and said you want to water.
IQ test.
How much more bag can
We nominate him and it goes to council. So the council has a week of it, so.
Well, you know what? I think that was a good concept.
I think it was a good discussion. Everybody's pretty civil. And,
I could.
Doing good, how are you?
Oh, really?